Well, my mother, it was getting down to the nitty-gritty, and my mother and me had a really good relationship. And she wanted me to bury her. And I said, okay. I said, you know, and I didn't want to offend any of my siblings and that, so I said, you know, I think it would be nice if we all went up and because she was going to get cremated and do the urn and that stuff. And you know, I always tried to associate, you know, I really had no jealousy, maybe some envy towards my siblings a little bit, but not really any jealousy per se against them. And I just was having trouble mixing this, but during the course of that time, a lot of these memories started coming back as being childhood. And my dad started getting irate. And the one night, well, my mother, I went into her bedroom one morning and I said to her, I said, Mom, I said, let it go. I said, I got to get out of this house. I can't take it no more. I got to get out of here. And so I had to leave that morning to go out. And that afternoon, my wife called and said that Mom passed away. Well, I got out. I come out there, and right there, just like I said, another hand of the Lord. The Lord was leading me places, you know, if you pay attention. You know, sometimes you think it's a coincidence, this and that, but if you sort of pay attention, God is trying to send something to you or give you a message of some sort or other. I went out there that night, my sister, my oldest sister, because my oldest sister, my one brother, he wouldn't even come around. He said he couldn't take it, you know, taking care of her, because it was me and my one brother and my oldest sister, but my wife was the one really doing the grunt of taking care of her, other than when the hospice people come around. They were a big benefit, but that night my sister asked me if I would stay there with my father, and I said, yeah. I said, I'll stay here. So I did. And we no sooner got in the dining room, we're sitting in there in the dining room, my dad starts bringing up these 2 rifles he gave me when I was a kid. And I'm sort of thinking, well, where's this coming from? You know, and because when all my siblings started hunting, my dad bought all of them guns. Well, when I come up through, I got his hand-me-down. So I had this old rifle and this old shotgun that I had, and he started on about this, and I looked at him, I said, Dad, I said, I think it's wise for you just to get off your chair, get in your bedroom, and get out of here. You know, I just lost my mother, and I was really close to my mother, and I knew at this point in time things weren't going to go well, because I could just see how things were going down. And when I was up burying her, I was up there covering her up. Everyone come down to the house. And by the time I got down to our house, all hell was breaking loose down there. I mean, people were fighting. My sister got into it with my aunt because my dad didn't tell my sister my aunt was coming to the funeral, which was my mother's sister, because when my grandmother passed away, they had hard feelings against each other. And so then I found out, then afterwards, my name got brought up about this, and I'm sort of thinking, now this is strange. Would I have anything to do with it? I'm up covering my mother up, and so by that time my blood was boiling. And then that night when my dad said about these rifles and this shotgun, next morning I got up early, I left from his house, and I went out and got the rifles and that. I took about to the gunsmith, and I said, Ted, I said, I want you to recondition these guns. Well, he said, you're going to have more money in them than what they're worth. I said, I don't care. I said, I want them reconditioned. So I had them reconditioned. In the meantime, I didn't go around them, because I didn't trust myself, because I would have killed him. If I would have lost it, I would have just killed him, because I tower over all my brothers. And the rage I had in me at that point in time, and when I hear siblings that killed their parents and that's the first thing that comes across my mind. I said, I wonder what they did to them when they were kids to invoke that kind of rage that they would kill them. and God knew that I would kill him. And it might sound harsh. That night in there, the only thing I wanted to do is go over there and pick him up by the scruff of the neck, yank his pants down, get my belt out, and give him a thrashing like he never knew. But I didn't. I left. I went out and got these guns done up, and I had my wife come back and give them to him, and he says, well, what's these for? And she says, you give them to Terry, don't want them, you give, well, no, they're his. No. And this is just how he'd switch off and on all the time like this. And so anyhow, when I was in church one day, I used to go to the Catholic church with my wife and that, and I was in church one day shortly after my mother passed away. And there was a sermon that day in there about parents being ungodly to you, that God doesn't expect you to be around. Respect them, don't be around them. They're not going to be, and I thought, this is a message from God, I'm leaving. So I didn't see my father for 5 years. They took him to home, and that was unusual for me with him. No matter what he did to me, I always come back. I never distanced myself from him, but at that point, God, as I look back now, I know that was God's hand to get me away from him, because I didn't know until years later that there was powers being trying to aggravate me to lose it on from one of my other siblings. That he was one of the ones in my family that I felt I could trust, so I'd opened my heart up to him. And I found out a number of years later that he was using it against me to finally get me to lose it, because he knew my temper, he knew how to push my buttons, and it's just amazing when God started putting all this stuff together, how everything just fit together like a glove. But I left for 5 years. I didn't see him. I just stayed away from him, didn't bother him, stayed away from everybody. And that's when Roger came into my life. I was, after that whole Catholic episode there with the priest and that, I sort of lost it with them. And I told my wife, I said, I'm not donating no money to them for them shenanigans and that. I said, I'm gonna, and by the way, I was molested by 2 males, through the course of my lifetime. That was another thing the devil was working on me. One time when I was 19 years old, another time when I was 22 years old, I was molested by 2 males that I was so drunk and so decapitated that I couldn't do anything about it. And yet Lucifer woke me up enough to let me know that that was a male doing the things he was doing. And that's like I told Brother Raj when God finally lifted me. My wife has no idea the tiger she was living with, the demons that were flying through me, and the stuff I was going through, and then them fighting with me, my family, and that stuff. And when your own parents and that, or your father and that, stab you in the back, and your sibling, there is only one person to turn to, and that is Jesus Christ. No matter how many times I backslid, when I come back, he had his arms open and said, come on back in here. And finally, after the 5 years I didn't have nothing to do with him, I was trying to stay in the Lord's Word. And I was, because the night, or the day my mother died, when I really started getting serious. I went out in my shop, I got on my knees, and I said, Lord, please come into my life. I don't know the exact date, but I can still see it to this day. I went out there, and then I wrote a thing in my mother's funeral services, and that apparently set my siblings off. And I just felt the Lord lead me to say these things, and I did. So I come out of that, and so through the course of the 5 years, the Lord was working on me with my father. I wasn't seeing him, but I was I was watching programs and that, reading the Word and that stuff, and me and him were arguing back and forth, you know. He wanted me to go get him saved, and I said, you got to be out of your mind. I want to kill him. I want to give him a beat. I don't want to save this guy. I said, I want to give him a beat. And, but through the course of time, the Lord won out. And I called Brother Raj, and this is how I met this guy. I was going through all this turbulence, and I need a straight shooter. I don't need somebody feed me a line of kumbaya. I want it straight. Tell me what I'm doing, and that's just the type of person. I don't like stuff sugarcoat. I used to watch John Hagee, and he sort of said, Roger just reminded me exactly of this Hagee. And my wife and me were going to different churches, and my sister-in-law, they need their barn redone, so I told them I'd come down and do it, and I was down there working, and during lunchtime and that stuff, I'd go in there, and he'd be in there painting and that stuff, and we'd get to talking, and God knows what we were talking about. It was politics, sex, and religion, probably, and we just hit it off, and we're talking around there, and one day Teresa comes up to me and she says, you know Roger's a preacher. I said, what? She said, yeah, he's a preacher. I said, you got to be kidding me. She says, no. So I went at lunchtime, I said, Raj, I said, I understand you're a preacher. He says, yeah. I said, well, you didn't tell me that. He said, well, you didn't ask. I said, man, I said, I got to come to your church. I got the directions off of them, and I told my wife, I said, we're going down to Roger's church this Sunday, and so I don't know what church we got to, but we come about halfway down the valley. I took a left. We got up on the side of that mountain, see the church. We thought, well, this is it. We pull up there, and we were the youngest people there. And this one guy, we sit down beside this one guy, he had to have been about 80 years old. He turns around and smiles at us. He has a big hole in the side of his face. He must have had skin cancer or something grafted out. I'm looking, what are we into here? You know? And so we stayed the service, and all these older people come. They were just so enthused that we were there, you know? I mean, and so I left. We left. Well, then that Monday, I could see Rod was sort of disappointed I didn't make it down to his church. I said, well, we tried, Roger. We were up here at some church here and that, and now he could give me a little better directions. Then the next Sunday, but as true as I stand here, the day I walked in that corridor out back there, I knew I was where I needed to be. I had a feeling come over me that was just so phenomenal. I knew this is where the Lord wanted me to be. And ever since that, me and him, he's lucky I don't live near him, because I'd be his worst nightmare. You know, I mean, he's been such a blessing, you know, other than the Lord Jesus Christ. Roger sort of has guided me and sort of encouraged me and this and that. But through the course, like I said, with my father, so I went down one night. I went down to Salem Hill, where he was at. And I probably grayed up a little more since the time you see me. And the Lord finally said to me, you know, you need to get your father saved. So I went down there that night, or that afternoon, and I walked in there. My dad was laying on the couch. His eyeballs got as big as pumpkin balls. I think he thought I was coming in there to kill him. And I walked in there. All I could do was curl up beside him and just cry like a baby and say, Dad, I don't understand what I ever did to you to treat me the way you treated me. And he was so, couldn't hear. His hearing was gone. I mean, he could read, but he couldn't hear. And so I cried there for a while and that stuff. And he got up and he got in the stool. And I said to him, I said, do you know Jesus Christ, Dad? Or